Welcome back to my channel. I'm going to make this another video back to some topic that I used to have before, which is my faith, religion. And I made a couple of videos on atheism, which got very pretty popular considering the size of my channel, and I got a lot of comments and a lot of debate. And this one is going to be a video that I saw and I thought it was interesting, and I'm just going to repeat this video here. It's 5 arguments for the existence of God that were developed by Thomas Aquinas. My daughter was mentioning that in her school they brought it up in her, I think, her philosophy class, and they mentioned Aquinas is one of the great philosophers of all time, and so he was, of course, a priest, I believe. He was made a saint later on. And anyway, he had arguments for. He did a book called Summa Theologica, and the way that he starts off is he argues against God, and then he makes the argument for God. But this is kind of like the the Reader's Digest version. You know what Reader's Digest was of the summary of the 5 arguments. And the first one is the argument for motion. And this is interesting because this is there is a law of physics regarding um, objects and motion, and the one of the laws of physics is that a body in motion stays in motion. So if something's moving, it will continue to move infinitely until something stops it. And you think, well, it's like that's not true. If you tossed the ball, it would stop. Well, it stops because the friction of the ground, the wind in front of it, stops it. But if you were in a vacuum, or say in outer space, and you pushed it, it would continue going forever. And that's actually what some scientists use in propulsion systems, I believe. They talk about propulsion systems using hydrogen, where it'll give it a little bit of a boost of hydrogen in one direction, and it'll propel it forward forever. It'll just keep going, and I think it'll also keep accelerating. But anyway, so that's the law of physics, and then the other law of physics is that a body at rest stays at rest. In other words, if something is here, this water bottle is here, and nothing ever touches it, it will always stay there. In other words, it will not move on its own. So the first argument for existence of God is the argument for motion, which essentially says that if it's standing here, it would have stayed here forever. Something had to push it to get it going. And that's one of the reasons that a lot of scientists did not like the Big Bang Theory. A lot of them were atheists, and they said no, it was just there forever. The universe exists in both directions in infinity. It was called the steady state theory. And when Georges-Henri Lemaitre and Hubble argued for the Big Bang that had a beginning, they would say that smacks of divine intervention. That unless something made that happen, it would have remained that singularity would have remained there forever. But something made it happen, and that's the first argument for God. The second is the argument for efficient cause, and this is kind of similar, but I understand why they put it in a different. They made it a different law. Is that everything has a reason? Like I'm sitting here. There's a reason why I'm here. There's a reason why I'm sitting down. There's a reason why I'm going to drink some water. There's a reason why I and it goes backwards, right? Something got me here, something got me to where I was, something, and it goes infinitely backwards, and everything has a cause. And the existence, or this existence, if you go all the way back, there must have been a cause that started it all. Now, what some atheists would argue and some other people would argue is, well, what caused God? Or what put God in motion? But here's where it gets tricky. And this is where um, both theists and atheists run into a problem. Is that, but it's a bigger thing, a problem for the atheist. Is if we go further back to the Big Bang, before the Big Bang, there was no matter, and there was no time. And so we can't think of an existence like ours. It would be something, it's outside of time and space. We know that it existed, but I mean, how do you comprehend that? But in that existence that appears to be infinite, probably is infinite, there exists God. And so God being in an existence that is not tied by time and those other constraints, and it would make sense that he would exist. And I think it's reasonable to assume that. And then an atheist would say, well, we can't assume anything. And some of them argue that because there's this argument about something coming from nothing. And one of the frustrations I have with a lot of people that change definitions is that they redefine nothing. Anyway, move on to the third argument. The third argument is the argument from possibility and necessity, and that everything is contingent on something else. And this is kind of interesting. There's a book a long time ago called Darwin's Black Box, and it had to do with evolution. You know how single cell creatures developed into multiple cell creatures, developed into little life forms, animals, and then they became us at some point. But how did that single cell creature eventually develop something as complex as an eye or as complex as a nervous system? Why did all those um, all those things that were necessary to happen just seem to be, that they just seem to come along, and which they did. I, it's contingent upon my breathing, let's say, that I have lungs, that that I survive, that I have a nervous system, that can you imagine not having eyes to see, not being able to, how would we get around? I mean, maybe the evolution would have come up with something different, um, but I mean, so you kind of like get the picture. Everything's kind of contingent on something else. If you go all the way back, the source of all contingency would be God. Okay, now the fourth argument is the argument from gradation. This one I'm not a big fan of, but it argues that everything has a certain degree of being good or bad, or better or worse. And maybe I just can't wrap my head around this, but that having the understanding that something's always better than something else would lead us to believe that there is something that is the best, perfection, and so that would be God. Like I said, it's hard for me to wrap my head around it, but um, I'll keep thinking about it. And the last one is the um, argument from design, and this is the argument that I like the most, and this is the one that makes the most sense to me. we talk about they talk about a watch, and you see all the little gears in there that make it work. And it's fantastic. I have some really cool watches. All of my watches, except for I think one or two, are wind up. And so if you take the back off of them, there's springs and gears and levers, and all these things are ticking back and forth, right, and moving back and forth, and they keep time. One of them's tied to a uh, mechanism that makes a little needle, go around in a full circle in 1 minute. It's made to do that, right? That's pretty incredible. Well, look at the universe, and look how everything seems to be so perfectly ordered. And from that singularity and the Big Bang, the probability that we would exist is almost, it's almost zero. It's this wild number. But it seemed that everything was structured in such a way here on Earth that we would exist. Years back, Carl Sagan, who argued for other planets and other civilizations on distant galaxies, talked about billions and billions of stars, and one of those stars, in those billions, would have a planet, and that planet would be able to produce life. Even if that were true, um, it would take a long time. The scenario here was so perfect, and even then, the probability, there was a planet, it was the right distance from the sun, there was a moon around that planet, it happened to have an atmosphere. That doesn't always happen. Look at the moon, right? No atmosphere there. I think Mercury also doesn't have an atmosphere. Um, but to have an atmosphere and to have the right combination of elements, and then there was this primordial soup, and the moon around it kind of like churned everything, so everything mixed around, which created proteins that eventually led to us. That would, and of course, we also have Jupiter that, because of its gravitational pull, will pull like asteroids that are coming by into itself rather than letting it hit us. That's the probability of that happen again somewhere else leads me to believe that maybe we're the only ones here. And that's because of how long it would have taken. I do somehow, and some people laugh at me for this. I think that a possibility would be multiverses and maybe parallel universes, maybe originating from that singularity, but maybe it went in a different direction. I don't know about it. The movie Particle Fever talked about that and how they were measuring Higgs boson, I believe, and the number of gigavolts in weight. If it was a certain weight, it would lead more credence to a multiverse. But all that would do is just give reality existence more time for something like this to happen. The that it did happen is just truly amazing. And I'm gonna end it at that. But to my atheist friends, somebody wrote a comment. One of the comments that I read made this argument, and I make the same argument. I don't know a lot of this as fact. All we have, um, in order to believe in God, are arguments. That's all we have. Arguments. This seems to make sense. You you're investigating something, and you gather the data, and it might point in a direction. You may never know. I mean, unless some crimes that were committed and there was no camera there to record it, the arguments just kind of like line up and they point in a direction. And that's I don't have proof of God. Um, and some atheists that are honest will say, yeah, we're not asking you for proof, we're just asking for reason, something that makes sense. Um, but I think that, as one of these people that wrote comments down said, um, atheists, you rely on faith just as much as we do. Um, and I think that a lot of atheists, um, they have something else going on, keeping them from accepting some of these arguments, then it doesn't make sense to them. But I'll leave it at that. And anyway, thank you for watching, and give me a thumbs up and write a comment and hit the alarm bell so you'll get to more when my videos come up. And thanks for watching. Thank you.